Hello, everyone. How's it going? Today is Thursday, November 1st, and it's nice to be doing another video. I had a midterm on Tuesday, so I was doing a lot of prepping for that. I wish I could have done this video a little bit sooner, but that's how it goes, especially up here at college. So I want to get into today's topic of discussion today. It's the young Americans for the Young American Exploration. That's the name of the show. So what better way of exploration than science? Science by nature is very explorative, explorative. One of the two. One of them's right. So yeah, what I want to get into: why is science so politicized? Why is there so many sides to be taken with science? And it's counterintuitive because we've been raised to believe and we know that science is factual. We are trained and raised to take science as a fact that is not really something that you can have an opinion on. It's like the Earth is round. You don't get to have an opinion on that. It is round, and um, well, round respectively. Don't get technical. Oh, it's technically a slightly ovular. Yeah, but anyways, you get it. It's not up for debate. It's a fact. So being a science is so factual, and like I said, not up for debate with that flat Earth, round Earth theory. Uh, why are there so many things of science that are up to debate? Some of them are pretty big. And why is science so politicized? And when it's politicized, when is it real? How do we know it's real? We're members of the populace who watch the news and we go, well, what's real and what's not? You know, we need to be informed, especially when we go to vote. And that's a great tangent to advertise to go vote. November 6th, 5 days from now, please go vote. Get your voice heard and vote on the issues that matter to you. So, anyways, science, why is it politicized? The media, as you've probably heard me mention in my other episodes, the media has a bias, and that bias is very left-leaning, majority of it. And well, you might say, "Oh, Trevor, what about Fox News?" Yeah, but Fox News is one out of probably six major one out of six major cable companies, and the rest of them are all left leaning. So, yeah, that puts that to bed real quick. So they have this left leaning stance on everything. And this is getting right into the first example I want to give of why, or of how science is so politicized. To illustrate that best, it's to use an example, and it's with climate change. And the media pushes climate change like crazy, and they're very aggressive, to say the least, in climate change. And spoiler alert, this is not a video that's going to be me talking about how climate change isn't real and all that. No, I recognize that there's something going on here. There's something that humans probably have to do with it. I recognize that. Let's get started. That's how I see it. So how come it's made out to be much more than it is? And I say that because um, we have that famous documentary that Al Gore made. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was called The Inconvenient Truth, something like that. It actually won an award, and in the documentary there's these predictions made that by around this time, it was made in early 2000s. It said by around this time, 2018, around this time, you're going to be seeing California is going to be in the ocean, and Nevada's going to be wine country, and all this stuff. The oceans are going to go incredibly high, and we're going to have no no ice and whatnot, and all of these I shouldn't say tactics, but all these predictions just have not come true. And the IPCC, I'm not very sure what it is, but this entity, obviously a lot of credibility. Um, they about 5 or 6 years ago they came out with a report that said we believe by 2018, 2019, 2020 the Earth is going to be this warm, and then they said we think it's going to be this warm around 2040. And they came out now and they go, oh well, the Earth is actually not as warm as we predicted it would be, and it looks like by the time we get to 2040 it's not going to be as warm then as we earlier predicted. So, why is it changing like that? What's the deal with that? And the whole thing with like climate change and global, like it used to be called global warming. Now it's called climate change. Why is that changing? No pun intended. But what's the deal with that? And how come there are all these predictions? The Earth is going to get warmer, the oceans are going to rise to cataclysmic events, and all of these things. Why are there these predictions and none of them are happening? They're happening, but they're not happening at nearly as fast as the media says. And that's the alarming thing, because when things like that start happening, you get a population that becomes very skeptical of what the media says. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people now that just honestly distrust the media because they're so dishonest. And I think climate change is a good example as to why. I mean, I see a lot of fear mongering from the media, and the problem is that when you get people who say, okay, climate change, it's happening. Scientists recognize that climate is changing, but climate has always been changing. The thing that scientists are just not very sure of is how much exactly are humans to do with this. So the Earth has gone into constant warming and cooling phases, right? The thing that's hard to determine is how much humans have an impact on it. It's like, well, is this very natural, or are the humans just totally killing this Earth? And right now, there's a lot of overwhelming evidence that does point to say that, yeah, humans are having an effect on climate change. So what happens is you have people on the left and you have people in the media who, climate change is so real, you can't deny it. We have to do all of these things. And then you have people on the right who say, okay, well, there are two people really that are not. If you're not in the sense of climate change, you're really one of two people, right? You say, okay, climate change is happening, but maybe it's not all that you say it is. Or there's the people that are much less popular and a lot more, or much less popular than the media portrays them, but they're still there. They're people who just outright deny. They're now humans have nothing to do with the climate change, and we can keep dumping carbon into the atmosphere and no problem. That's actually a very small amount of people in society today, especially in America, and the media portrays that group of people to be much larger than they actually are. Anyways, what I was saying is you have the left who is so militant in their push for fighting climate change, right? But then you have the right who says, look, the IPCC is just saying that the Earth is not warming as fast as they said. And then you also have people like Al Gore making predictions, and none of them are coming true. By the way, Al Gore's not a scientist, so I mean, I'm not sure what the credibility is there, but you have people working on these documentaries that are making these predictions, and none of them are coming true. So they're saying, okay, well, there's something that's going on here. It's not true. What the media and the left is portraying, there's a certain amount of falsehood to it. So what's really going on here? Well, the fact is that there's really two things going on here, right, with the left. They have an agenda, right? So, I mean, like most entities in the role of government, they want to assume power, and the problem is that their means of assuming power are a little bit more radical than perhaps others, in that they're fear mongering, right? They're telling you all these cataclysmic things are going to happen, but it's like, well, they're not really happening, and then you also have you know, there's to prove that it's really not as we shouldn't be seeing it as the end of the world like it's being portrayed in the media. The Nobel laureate in economics, right? He actually got a Nobel Prize because of his economics research in climate change. So he did what any economist did, and he takes a problem that you wouldn't think is based in economics, but as my great wonderful economics teacher in high school, as he said, you know, you can apply economic thinking to just about any thing in life. And what he did was he did not my high school teacher, the Nobel laureate. What he did was he basically looked at the cost benefit analysis of solving climate change, and he looked at the opportunity cost. Now, to remind you what opportunity cost is, if you haven't taken like a basic economics class, or if you've just forgotten, economics is the cost, or not economics. Opportunity cost is the cost you pay for foregoing that event, right? So there's you have two choices and you choose one. Well, your opportunity cost is going with the other choice. So he looked at the opportunity cost and cost benefit and did the cost benefit analysis of working to solve climate change. And basically they came out and he said, well, if the Earth, I believe it was 2040, I can't remember in this report. I'll try my best to link it down below. But this report said we're going to get this warm by 2100 and then this warm by 2040, right? And he said that if we want to prevent it from getting so warm by 2040, I think it was 3 degrees Celsius at 2040, or maybe it's I think it was 2100. But let's say we want to stop it from getting 3 degrees Celsius warmer, the Earth, and by 2100, and we want to reduce it to 2.5 degrees Celsius. Here's the thing. He said, man, see, I wish I would have that article up, but please look into it. I'm going to put the source below. But I see, now I'm thinking it's 2040. I really apologize for being unsure about this, but please look into it. But I think it was by 2040. If we want to reduce the temperature by a half by a half a degree, it would cost $137 trillion. But the only benefit we would get from that would quantify as about $94 trillion. So that is perfect cost-benefit analysis. And what it is that it would cost more to keep working on it. So that's not to say to abandon the idea completely, but it's like the problem is that there's just so many restrictions that are being put onto businesses, corporations, energy suppliers, energy resources, that it just becomes really expensive. And there will just be a point where the benefit will outweigh the cost, but he argues that until that time, we don't need to be so aggressive in changing our policy towards it. So, like I said, I'm not. That's not to say to throw it away and abandon solving climate change completely. The thing is that what can we do now that will become very efficient and will lower our impact on the climate? Well, I think there's two really logical things to do, because one is we need to find a very efficient resources, and two, we need to help those who are impacted most by the consequences of climate change. So to talk about the first one, we need to find a really efficient way to create energy, and the reason that is because typical energy that we get now, fossil fuels and coal and other things, they're just not efficient because they're wasteful, and the power we get out of them just is not very good. Because here's the thing, with fossil fuel and coal power, the efficiency is in the 40 to 60% range. I can't remember specifically, but it's in 40 to 60% range depending on who you're asking. And then but then the other problem is, you say, well, okay, what about solar power? What about wind power? Well, wind power and solar power are very inefficient, because it costs really a low amount of money, but the amount of energy they put out is really low, and so that doesn't really work too. So the solution, I think, right now, that we know for sure that works, is nuclear power. And the thing with nuclear power is it's in the 90 to 95% efficiency range, so hardly any waste, and it's producing a bunch of power. So that's good. And the thing about the fact that it produces so much power is that if we can popularize it, the actual cost of doing it will become lower, because that's just how basic economics work. When it becomes popular, the price goes down. So the problem is that people are scared of it, and then people are there's a distrust in it, right? So people are like, okay, well, you're going to have all these nuclear power plants around. I don't want to be living next to a nuclear power plant and absorb a bunch of energy. Well, there was a gentleman from the Navy who came in to talk to my physics class in high school when I was a senior, and he basically broke it down as working on and living near a nuclear power plant. You actually absorb the same amount of radiation as you would from the sun, phone, and other technology, and in some cases you actually experience less. And the net amount of radiation that you absorb actually is not at a high enough rate to where your body can't get it out, right? So it's at a rate to where your body can handle it, can take care of it. So that argument already gets put down. And then another thing was like, well, how safe is it? Because we all know when we think of nuclear power, we think of Chernobyl and the nuclear disaster in Japan from the hurricane. Well, what this gentleman pointed out was that the thing with Chernobyl is that the people made a very big mistake that was actually common knowledge back then, and especially common knowledge and refined now. And then the thing with the Japanese power plant is, it was right on the coast, and this place that already experiences earthquakes, you would think that they would be a little bit more strategic of their placement of that nuclear power plant. I don't want to be the one to say that they should have placed it better, because I don't know, maybe that was the only place they could place it. So I don't want to be too judgmental on that. I don't want to come across that way. But at the same time, it's like, well, if you want to put a nuclear power plant on the coast, you have to be accepting of the fact that Japan experiences a lot of earthquakes, and it just so happened that they had a huge earthquake that triggered a huge hurricane, and big disaster. So what he actually said, what this gentleman from the Navy said, is that there's so many safety protocols when it comes to nuclear power. They make there's just so many teams working on so many little aspects of the nuclear power plant to make sure it's safe, and it's also combined with AI, and that is the most fail safe way that they do it. And he made a very convincing argument to prove how safe it actually is, and that's why I think nuclear power is the way to go. And then you might also argue, well, uranium's not very plentiful, and it can be kind of hard. I think the only places to get them are Canada and Australia, at least the big sources. And that's true, but fossil fuels are going to run out someday. We can't keep using those. So I mean, might as well use uranium while we got it, and then while we're using it, find more efficient ways to produce energy. And that's also not to limit it to uranium. There's so many other elements that you can use for nuclear energy, thorium being a popular one, in some ways more efficient than uranium. And I've heard it's even more plentiful than uranium. So the opportunities are actually much bigger than we think. So there's the whole energy thing. It's like, well, with climate change, what can we do to make sure that we're operating the best, to where we're putting in this as little of a footprint as we can in the atmosphere? And I think researching and developing new ways of energy is the way to go. And then when you do that, you can find really good sources of energy, popularize them, and make it cheap. And when you make it cheap and popularize it, it becomes not only is it just much better for the environment, much cleaner. Big factories and places of that's what they'll use their energy on, instead of putting so much carbon out into the atmosphere and other byproducts. They use nuclear power because it's so cheap, if it becomes so popularized. So I think that's the thing to do. And the media and the left, they don't really want to acknowledge that, and I don't know why. It's weird. Actually, I know why, but I don't want to get very conspiratorial. Maybe I'll do it in a few minutes. But nonetheless, second thing I said about what we can do about climate change now is help those who are most impacted. What I mean is that about 100 years ago, the death rate, I believe it was in the United States, the death rate from natural disasters was about 130 per million. And that has gone down to about 4 per million in the 2010s. 4 per million. And that is actually attributed to the rise of economic status with people. People are just much better off. And if you want to learn more about how people are much better off and how people are much less poor than what they are, I urge you to go check out my other episode called The Greatest Sad Time, in which the first half I talk about how we're living in such a good time. So, with that being said, we need to address the poor parts of the country, because take this for example. When a place like Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, these places, well, not necessarily Alabama, but you get it, these southern places that experience hurricanes, when they happen, not that many people die. So it is reported in the news, which is, it's deserving when people pass away. I think people ought to know about it, but the numbers are actually pretty low in relativistic terms to how many people are there to how many people die. It's a very low number, and which is great. Very, very low number of people dying. But you compare that to places like say like the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, places that experience, I think they call them typhoons, I think so, but hurricanes, but on the other side of the world. Um, you actually get much more, I shouldn't say much more, but many more deaths because of these hurricanes. And I'm using hurricanes as an example because I'm sure we've all noticed how hurricanes have gotten much, well, there. See, that's the thing. You don't know how much of it is fear mongering by the media, but hurricanes are a problem nonetheless, and some of them are getting pretty nasty, and it's kind of scary. But you're kind of getting a little bit more frequent hurricanes. Nonetheless, it's scary, and it's also fatal. So when you get these things in these poorer countries, these people are, there's much higher percentage of poorer people and much more poorer than people relative to the United States. Um, but you have more deaths. So that's why I think a big a big thing that people are, or when I say people, a big thing that the media aren't talking about is solving those who are impacted the most by climate change now. And I mean, if you're going to attribute climate change to, or if you're going to attribute these hurricanes to climate change, then we ought to help those who are most impacted by those. So that's why. Well, at least that's my take on how to combat what climate change is, and until we learn more about it, learn the nature of it more. And I mean, you could argue, people argue, well, we know enough about it, it's the world's gonna end, and yada yada yada. And well, okay, the I pointed out earlier, we don't actually know as much as we did. The predictions were wrong. These big, important, credible entities have pointed out that their predictions were wrong, and the person who won the Nobel Prize even pointed out that it's not efficient to just keep putting pressure on or expending vast amount of resources in combating climate change in the way that we're doing. And I think the reason why that it's I'm just going to come out and say it. The fear mongering from the media, the leftist media, is, they want to assume power, and they want to make the power of the government bigger. And you may believe that the government should be bigger. I personally believe the government needs to be much smaller, even smaller than it is now. But I think that's why they do it. So I urge you to look into what's really going on with climate change. Now, to go on, to continue with this topic of discussion, the whole scientific conundrum, if you will. You have there's people who just outright deny climate change, right? And the left is very quick to attack them. Like I said, it's actually a smaller number than the media says, but there are a lot of people on the right. Most of the people that you find that do outright deny climate change are on the right, but don't let that be mistaken for the fact that there are people on the right who do believe that the climate is changing, but it's not in the sense that the left portrays it, right? So with that being said, you have one side who is just totally accepting of it and they're militant of it, and then you have another side where there are people who outright deny it. But it's scientific, right? There's enough scientific data to prove that the climate is changing and that humans are having an impact on that, right? So there are people who are denying that. And like I said, science that we've been taught, it's to be taken as a fact, not of an opinion. So I don't want to portray that, the left is so science-based, because I see that a lot for some reason, and I think a lot of it has to do with the left in academia. However, science has become there's just they've based it a lot of off of climate change, but it's like the left is so embracing of science and the right is so not. Well, that's not true, because both sides are have their ignorances. and I'll point out an ignorance that the left has to science. And well, trigger warning, I'm just going to come out and say it. Their denial of science is the transgender topic, and and the funny thing is that Bill Nye, I mean, I loved watching his shows when I was younger. You know, during school, it was just a highlight of the day, and I'm sure a lot of you could relate to that. And shoot, I love Bill Nye. He's great. He's a big personality, and he's just a cool dude. And but I'm not attacking him. I'm just attacking with what the left is doing. Is back in the '90s when he made those shows. I believe it was the '90s, but he actually pointed out in one of the episodes to try and impersonate him as best as I can. He said your gender is made up of chromosomes, and you know, your X and Y chromosomes, your X and X chromosomes, that depends, or that determines your gender. And I think there is a streaming service that has those shows, and they actually cut out that part, which is kind of it's like, hey, what are you doing there? What's your idea? You know, what are you getting at? And and then on his show that he has now, there's a show on Netflix he does. He came out and said, you know, like, oh, gender is not based off, you know, chromosomes, and just kind of trying to take a less scientific approach to it, right? Now, I don't want this to be confused with me attacking transgender people, because it's definitely, you know, a community of people that exist, and they're going through something. Now, I think a big thing about the science that the left ignores, there are two things. It's the whole fact that your gender is based off your DNA, your chromosomes. You are born a man or you were born a woman. And the thing is that I think it's called here. Excuse me one moment while I Google this. Okay, so the DCM-5 Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. It's a book by American Psychiatric Association. Okay? The most up-to-date version, the DCM-5, states that there is a disorder called gender dysphoria, and it is a mental disorder in which you believe you are a gender of which you were not born with. And I think if people were to address it as a mental disorder, I know I'm getting in a lot of hot water with that, but if people were to address it for what it is, and it's not me saying it, it's literally the American Psychiatric Association saying it, that it is a mental disorder. If people were to attack it that way, you would, I think, sorry, I don't want to say attack it. That's not how I want to portray my rhetoric on that. It's if they were to go about, you know, we see a lot of, you know, we need to solve transgender issues and be more inclusive. If they were to see it more for what it is, I think you would have a more accepting group of people to it. And then at the same time, you know, if you were to address it for what it was, you may be able to combat what a lot of what they go through. Because if you were to just isolate any identity based off race or sex, or in this gray area, transgenderism, transgenders have a very high rate of suicide, and it's incredible how high their suicide rate is, and it's very alarming. So I think if it was addressed in the way that it is taken to be, you may be able to combat that. Now, it's not to say that some of that suicide comes from bullying. I mean, I recognize that. I mean, I can't imagine how hard it is to live with that. But, you know, it's like if people were to recognize it for what it was, and say, oh, well, it's more of a mental disorder, because I mean, people, Yeah, and there are scum who still pick on him, but when people see someone who obviously has a mental disorder, or some sort of disorder, um, I'm not talking kids, but I'm talking mainly adults. They address them that way. They don't, they're like, okay, there's a disorder, and it's fine. They can't help it, and if it would to be addressed that way, um, people would be more accepting. I think, and I know a lot of other people think that too. Um, so that's the point. The point I'm making with that example is that both sides can be the victim of denying outright science, and that can be a problem because it just goes to show that there's agendas that are being pushed, and that's what I want that's the answer to that question that I asked in the beginning. Why is science so politicized? And the answer is because people have agendas. And it's like, well, how do you get around that? The media is so biased, and they have their interpretations of what scientific data reveals, and sometimes that the interpretations are dead wrong or kind of wrong, and it's like, well, what do you do with that? Best thing I could say is you just have to get as close to the source as you can. Try and read. I would say the more alarming a scientific fact is displayed to be as, the more alarming that is, the more that should invite you to do further research and then draw your own conclusions on that. Because I think that there's a big deficit in people making their own conclusions based off scientific research. The media just kind of spoon feeds people into what to believe, and that's not science alone, but for the case being now, yeah. So look into it and do research on your own. Try and get as close to the source as you can, and then the thing is, how do we solve these problems, right? So we have problems, for example, like climate change, and other problems that science is saying, look, scientific studies show that we have a problem here, we have a problem here. Well, we have to acknowledge the fact that both sides of the aisle, if not many sides of a problem, we have to first recognize that each side wants to solve the problem. If we can all agree that we want the problem to be solved, that's an immediate baseline respect that we can all have for each other. And if we can start off with the baseline respect, and this goes in so many different aspects of life, not just science, but if we can just have that baseline respect for each other, that we want to solve the problem, let's solve this problem together, we can get through a lot more things. And it's just the various or the variance in differences is one side wants to solve the problem differently than the other, and then that's when you have that respect, you can come up with compromises. So, and sometimes compromise can actually be the best thing, right? It suits both sides, and it can turn out to be the best way. It's a little bit of both, or a little bit of three, or however many sides there are to it. So to wrap it up, the whole thing with science, with why is science so politicized? Why does it seem so open to debate when we know that science is something of a fact? How do you solve that? Well, you look into it more you can. Try your best to find credible sources. If you can, get the news from the source itself, the scientific papers, journals, publishings, and draw your own conclusions off that. Second, how do we solve this problem? We all have to acknowledge that we want to solve the problem. A big thing that I'm seeing in America today, and not just with science, is well, I have my own personal bias, but to be as objective as I can, each side has their own agenda, and each side is kind of having hatred toward the other, and they're just not even respecting the fact that both sides want to solve a problem. The words taste a little bit like vinegar coming out of my mouth because like I said, I have my own biases, but we both sides just need to recognize that we all want to solve the problem. So if we can do that, we can actually get problems solved. And I urge you, when you're having these discussions, these debates with people who disagree with you, which I encourage you to do because it will expand your knowledge. But when you do these things, have that baseline respect that you both want to, that you would both like to see the problem solved. So, with that being said, I think that's a great way to end. And I really hope you enjoyed the episode today. I know I enjoyed it. It was fun. I enjoy doing these episodes every single time, and I hope to keep doing them and to do them a little bit more frequently. That'd be nice. So I want to get some guest people in, and where you're not just listening to me talk to you. So please take what I've given you, my opinion on things, and the facts that I've given you. Please take them and interpret them for yourself, and take what you want. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you. I really do appreciate you. So take what you want, and please, I love feedback. Also love if you have something you feel that I left out that you thought is very important, comment on the video. If you want to debate a little bit, respectfully, please. I like I said, we both want to solve the problem, so let's debate respectfully. Please comment, and also follow me on my secondary Twitter page. That is tmauk_2. That's TMAUK_2. That is my Twitter page for all intellectual, political, and explorative realms. So please follow me on there, and if you like this video, please literally like the video and share it. Please subscribe. I keep doing these videos, and give me feedback. Also, I always love suggestions. If you feel there's a problem, that's because the show's geared towards Gen Z and tail end millennials. If you feel that there's a problem that group of people are experiencing, please let me know, and I'll try and do an episode on it. And I just really thank you for joining me on this this experience, this journey. And I want to keep expanding my mind as well as expanding your mind. I encourage you to please find the facts, respect one another, and listen to people who disagree with you. So with that being said, I like I said again, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next video. And until then, take care.